the Chinese silk wings. In the year 1505, high above the mountains of Sichuan province, a silk merchant's son climbed to the top of a bamboo tower constructed for this purpose. Built from reinforced bamboo poles lashed with silk cords, rising nearly 80 feet above the mountain plateau. Witnesses said he remained aloft for nearly 100 paces, maybe more, before the wind shifted unexpectedly, carrying him sideways toward a cliff face with increasing velocity. His body was found 3 days later in a ravine, buried partially under fallen bamboo and torn silk. But before that final, fatal jump, before his death sent the local magistrate scrambling to suppress details and warn villagers against speaking of the event, this young man had constructed something that shouldn't have existed for another 300 years according to official history. A flying machine made entirely of silk stretched over a bamboo frame, engineered with articulated joints and what appeared to be control surfaces, adjustable wings and tail elements designed to alter direction and angle of descent. According to local accounts preserved in temple records now lost to time, the device had achieved limited but genuine flight in earlier tests, gliding from hillside to hillside with surprising stability and control. The design was remarkably similar to what would later become known as man-carrying kites, a technology documented in Chinese military records centuries later, supposedly first appearing in the 6th century CE. But this particular flying machine vanished completely. Its design was never recorded in official imperial archives. No scholar preserved its schematics. No military strategist evaluated its potential. The temples that housed records of its creation burned during a period of unrest in 1520, just 15 years after the event. And by the time historians came looking for proof decades or centuries later, nothing remained but fragmentary village stories contradicting each other wildly. Some villagers insisting the device could genuinely fly, others claiming it was merely an elaborate decoration, a toy for a wealthy merchant's heir. Locals who remembered the event were remarkably reluctant to speak about it. Some had been warned directly by authorities not to discuss it. Others simply preferred to forget, finding the memory uncomfortable. What troubles researchers today is the timing and the pattern. Chinese kites date to the 5th century BC according to verified historical texts. Man-carrying. Kites appear documented in military records from the 6th century CE, explicitly described as military reconnaissance tools. Yet this 1505 device suggested a refinement, an advancement that should have left traces throughout the historical record. Instead, silence. If advanced kite technology was mastered in ancient China, what happened to those elaborate designs? Why does the historical record skip and jump as if key chapters were deliberately removed? And why would a young man's experimental flight be something the magistrate felt so compelled to suppress? The Greek steam pigeon. Around 350 BC in ancient Greece, there was a philosopher named Archytas of Tarentum. He was no mere theorist lost in abstract contemplation. He held positions of considerable political power, influenced military strategy for his city-state, and moved in circles where innovation meant advantage in warfare and economics. According to the Roman historian Aulus Gellius, writing more than 4 centuries later in his work Attic Nights, Archytas designed a machine shaped like a bird, a pigeon, that propelled itself through the air using steam or compressed air. Not mechanical bird wings that an operator would flap, not buoyancy from hot air or lighter gases, but internal pressure, pneumatic force, driving the machine forward through space. Gellius claimed it actually flew, suspended on wires or perhaps pivoting on some kind of mount, driven by what he called an aura, or spirit. Language that to modern ears suggests pneumatic technology, though scholars debate whether Gellius truly understood what he was describing. The specifications Gellius provided hint at considerable mechanical sophistication. A sealed chamber where pressure could build, some mechanism for generating or storing gas, some form of directional control to guide the bird's motion. If true, this would predate modern jet propulsion by over 2,000 years, predating even the understanding of thermodynamics that would make such technology explicable. But here's what confounds historians most deeply. No remaining artifact exists. No technical drawings survive in any manuscript. No follow-up experiments appear in any surviving philosophical text. Archytas's own writings, which were vast in quantity and covering geometry, mathematics, and mechanics, contain not a single mention of this device. Only Gellius's account remains. A single second-hand reference from an author writing in the 2nd century CE about events 400 years previous. Everything else is gone. What happened to the original machine? Did Archytas destroy it himself, recognizing it as too dangerous? Was it lost in the destruction of Alexandria's library during Caesar's campaigns? Or was it deliberately suppressed, deemed too dangerous for the philosophical community to pursue further? The Greeks created water clocks of astonishing complexity, automatic doors operated by fire and water, early computers like the Antikythera mechanism recovered from a shipwreck. Yet they supposedly abandoned the principle of steam propulsion immediately and completely. Why? If they knew how to harness pressurized gas to create motion, what else might they have discovered? And who decided that knowledge should end? The Sanskrit vimanas. Deep within ancient Indian Sanskrit texts, scattered across the Vedas, the Ramayana, and the Mahabharata, references appear repeatedly to flying machines called vimanas. These are not vague metaphors or poetic flourishes about gods descending on clouds. They are described with operational specificity. The Pushpaka Vimana, according to detailed accounts in the Ramayana, was a vessel capable of traveling between kingdoms over vast distances, possessing the remarkable property that for any number of occupants sitting within it, there would always be one more seat available, a curious detail that appears in multiple manuscripts independently. Military vimanas are described in texts as survey aircraft, reconnaissance vehicles capable of mapping uncharted territories for strategic purposes, with operators trained in navigation and observation. The Yantra Sarvasva, attributed to the sage Maharshi Bharadvaj, classifies vimanas into 3 distinct categories based on operational range: those for local travel between nearby cities, those for intercontinental journeys, and those for travel to various planets and celestial bodies. A classification system, an organizational structure, not poetry, not myth. Yet when modern researchers examined the most detailed surviving text about Vimana construction, the Vaimanika Shastra, they found something peculiar and troubling. The text was supposedly dictated in the 1920s by a Sanskrit scholar named Pandit Subbaraya Shastri, who claimed channeled knowledge directly from the ancient sage Bharadvaj himself. No original manuscripts predated 1918. No prior references exist. Engineers at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore examined the text in 1974 and concluded the aeronautics described were poor concoctions, showing no actual understanding of flight principles or physics. But here's the puzzle that troubles researchers. If the Vimanas were pure mythology, invented fantasy with no basis in reality, why were they so consistently described across centuries? Why the technical categories? Why the precise operational scenarios matching actual aircraft design philosophy? Why did this myth persist across multiple Indian empires, different languages, and centuries of social upheaval? The original Sanskrit texts were destroyed and lost during invasions, during the Mughal period, during the rise and fall of dynasties. What knowledge was erased with each burning library? What if the Sanskrit texts preserved genuine technological knowledge that later generations of compilers, stripped of the original technical context and mechanisms, repackaged as mythology to preserve the information in a form that would survive? The Egyptian Saqqara Bird. In 1898, during careful excavations at Saqqara, archaeologists uncovered a small wooden object buried in a limestone tomb. A bird meticulously carved from sycamore wood, mounted on a thin wooden stick that appears to have been a perch or stand, 6 inches in length, weighing barely an ounce, remarkably light. It was dated to approximately 200 BCE through established archaeological methods and cataloged, then placed deep within a museum collection storage area, where for decades it was dismissed as a ceremonial falcon figurine representing the god Horus, one of dozens of similar religious artifacts created for funerary purposes. But in the 1970s, someone examined it with fundamentally different eyes, questioning the conventional interpretation. The bird had no legs carved into it, highly unusual for a falcon representation in Egyptian art. Its wings were angled in a way that didn't match natural bird anatomy at all, but resembled instead something else. Its tail featured a vertical stabilizer, a fin pointing downward perpendicular to the body, unlike any natural bird anatomy known to zoological science. An aeronautical engineer examined it with fresh perspective and noticed specific proportions that seemed deliberate. The wing-to-body ratio, the angle of attack on the wings relative to the body, the weight distribution balanced in a specific way. According to one detailed aeronautical analysis published in academic circles, the Saqqara bird could theoretically produce 4 times its own weight in lift if properly tested and launched at appropriate speeds. When a scale model was meticulously built using the original bird's exact dimensions and wind tested with a horizontal stabilizer added to the tail for stability, results showed it actually flew with considerable stability through air. But when tested repeatedly without modification, without the added tailplane element, it failed consistently. It was aerodynamically unstable without the tail. And here lies the central methodological deception surrounding this artifact. Every modern scientific test of the Saqqara bird that demonstrated successful flight required significant alterations and additions to the design. Wings were reshaped to match modern aircraft wing curves. A horizontal tailplane was added that didn't exist on the original artifact. The overall shape was made more streamlined than the original wooden carving. Were the ancient Egyptians really this sophisticated in their understanding of aerodynamics? Or were researchers imposing modern aeronautical principles onto an artifact that was always purely ceremonial in purpose? Egyptologists maintain very firmly that no credible evidence of Egyptian aircraft exists anywhere in the archaeological record. No other artifacts support the hypothesis of flying machines. No wall paintings clearly depict human flight. No hieroglyphic texts describe aircraft or flying machines. Yet this small carving continues to baffle and perplex researchers. What if it was a scale model, a test design carved from available materials? What if someone in ancient Egypt possessed genuine knowledge about aerodynamics, knowledge about how air moves across surfaces, knowledge that would not be understood or formally systematized until centuries later? Then the knowledge vanished, taking the methodology, documentation, and full specifications with it. The Saqqara bird sits in a museum today, studied and debated endlessly by experts with conflicting conclusions, never fully explained or understood by mainstream science. The Persian levitation device. In the 7th century BCE, during the reign of the Achaemenid Empire under Darius the Great, Persian scholars gathered in the library at Ctesiphon to study advanced technologies. According to fragmented accounts later preserved in Islamic texts and medieval Persian chronicles, they were studying a device of remarkable sophistication. The accounts describe it vaguely, filtered through centuries of retelling and translation. A mechanism using what they called the principle of the lodestone, a force capable of opposing gravity itself. Stone tablets depicting peculiar geometric arrangements of magnetic stones were said to exist in the archives, showing patterns that contemporary scholars couldn't properly interpret. Engines that could lift heavy objects without combustion or visible means of force acting upon them. The mechanism supposedly involved concentric rings of magnetized metal, oriented very carefully toward cardinal directions, creating an electromagnetic field that could support substantial weight indefinitely. Demonstrations were allegedly conducted before the Persian court, with objects levitating visibly under the rings. But then the accounts simply stop. The detailed Sassanid texts vanish from the historical record. When Islamic scholars in Baghdad recorded fragments of this technology in the medieval period, around the 9th century, they described it only in terms of mythology and legend, as if the technical knowledge had been lost to translation. By the time European scholars encountered these fragmentary accounts, they were written in metaphorical language so dense and symbolic that the technical specifics were obscured completely beyond recovery. Modern physicists examining the fragmentary descriptions suggest the Persians may have been experimenting with principles we now associate with electromagnetism and magnetic fields, discoveries that wouldn't occur until the 18th and 19th centuries. The loss of the Sassanid library, burned and dispersed during Islamic invasions and conquest, took whatever knowledge existed with it. What mechanism did they truly understand? Why did no other empire pursue magnetic propulsion after the Persian knowledge dispersed? Why does every trace lead backward to a time when the records no longer exist? The Islamic celestial globe. Around 1000 CE in Baghdad, during the height of the Abbasid Caliphate's golden age of scientific advancement and discovery, A scholar named al-Biruni wrote detailed accounts about a device described to him by colleagues he knew and trusted deeply. A hollow sphere, precisely crafted from bronze and copper metals in perfect proportion, filled with carefully measured amounts of compressed air, rotating in complete silence on magnetic pivots that appeared to use opposing forces. The device, supposedly levitated slightly above its base platform, could be directed to move in specific directions by adjusting internal air pressure and magnetization patterns through external controls. Al-Biruni's notes, preserved in scattered fragments across multiple ancient manuscripts, clearly suggest this was no theoretical speculation or abstract philosophical debate. He witnessed actual demonstrations himself, observing the device directly. The device moved without any visible propulsion system, without ropes or levers, without any discernible mechanism of force acting upon it. Observers reported watching the sphere hover in place and move deliberately, claiming it could sustain height indefinitely if the internal mechanisms remained balanced and properly tuned. The sphere was reportedly constructed by master craftsmen in Damascus, using techniques that required extraordinary precision metalwork and profound understanding of magnetic properties and their physical interactions. But the device was viewed with deep suspicion and fear by certain religious authorities and conservative scholars. It appeared to violate fundamental principles of natural philosophy and theological doctrine about how the world should operate according to divine law. The craftsmen responsible vanished from historical record. No further records of their work surfaces, no names in guild documents, absolutely nothing. No artifact survives from this period. No complete technical description was ever recorded in surviving texts. What remains are al-Biruni's cryptic references scattered across his many works and rumors of deliberate destruction recorded centuries later. The sphere was supposedly dismantled deliberately to prevent its replication and spread to other scholars. If Islamic scholars in the 10th century understood principles of levitation through magnetism and pneumatics, advanced principles of force and counterforce, why was this technology completely abandoned? Why did subsequent Islamic dynasties not pursue it? The library at Baghdad would later burn during Mongol invasions. Knowledge scattered to the winds. And centuries later, Europe would rediscover these principles as if they were entirely new scientific discoveries. But they weren't new. Someone already knew. The Renaissance ornithopter plans. Leonardo da Vinci filled thousands upon thousands of pages with detailed sketches of flying machines during his prolific career. The ornithopter, a human-powered device with a vast wingspan exceeding 30 feet, designed to mimic bird flight through mechanical flapping. The aerial screw, a concept for a helicopter that predated the actual helicopter by approximately 400 years. A device that understood the principle of vertical lift through rotating surfaces. The designs were remarkably sophisticated, showing understanding of aerodynamic principles that wouldn't be formally systematized and taught until centuries later. He examined bird flight with obsessive attention to detail, dissecting birds, studying wing articulation, understanding how feathers managed air pressure. He grasped weight distribution, thrust vectors, angle of attack, and lift principles. Modern engineers reconstructing his designs acknowledged their theoretical soundness and his insights into flight mechanics. But something is deeply peculiar about Leonardo's work. He filled journals with these flying machine drawings between 1487 and 1510, perhaps 20 years of intense focus on aviation, yet he constructed no full-scale working prototypes that survived to the present day. He tested small wooden models, yes, building and attempting to fly them. But the larger machines, the grand ornithopter designs, if they were ever constructed, vanished without any historical trace. Moreover, Leonardo's notebooks contain suspicious gaps. Crucial specifications are missing from designs that are otherwise detailed. Calculations that logically should follow from his known physics don't appear where expected. Key mechanical components are referenced but never fully explained. It's as though Leonardo knew something about flight that he deliberately omitted from his recorded writings. Some sections of his notebooks were physically removed. We know this from analyzing the binding signatures and missing folios. But by whom? When? Why were pages torn out? Leonardo's flying machines, if built and tested successfully as some accounts suggest, would have predated powered flight by 4 centuries. Yet we have only drawings, only concepts, Only his written assertions that human flight was possible. If he succeeded, where is the evidence? If he failed, why do his designs continue to work mathematically on paper? What did Leonardo understand that he couldn't or wouldn't fully record? The Inca Sky Roads. High in the Andes Mountains at elevations that would challenge modern climbers, the Inca Empire constructed an impossible network of roads connecting distant settlements and mountain peaks. But accounts from Spanish conquistadors who documented their conquests describe something additional that perplexed them. Flying vessels. The term used in early Spanish records was naves volantes, flying ships or aerial vessels. Inca traditions and accounts, as recorded by Spanish chroniclers like Juan de Betanzos and others, spoke of ceremonial objects that could ascend into the sky, used by high priests and nobility for communication with deities. When Spanish chroniclers recorded Inca accounts in the 1500s, they documented descriptions of craft that moved through the air on what the Inca called invisible currents, guided by priests who understood the channels of the wind and the patterns of atmospheric movement. The Spanish conquistadors dismissed these accounts as mythology and fantasy, products of pagan religion and superstition. The Inca themselves, after military conquest and forced conversion to Christianity, stopped speaking of the technology. Either it was forbidden to discuss, or they deliberately chose to preserve secrets from their conquerors. Did they destroy the machines to prevent Spanish possession and reverse engineering? Did the conquistadors fundamentally misunderstand Inca descriptions of some other propulsion method, perhaps hot air or some principle they couldn't translate? Yet here is what troubles modern researchers. We know the Inca created the Nazca lines, vast geometric patterns covering miles of desert, visible only from the air, not from ground level. Why would an ancient culture create such patterns if they could not observe them from above? The patterns served astronomical functions, yes, aligned to solstices and stars. But did they serve another purpose? Markers for aerial navigation? Landing platforms? Ceremonial sites for flight operations? The conventional archaeological explanation is that the Nazca lines were created for ritual and religious purposes. But the Inca accounts speak directly of seeing the lines from the sky. How? No archaeological evidence of hot air balloons or their remains exist. No wreckage of flying apparatus has been found. Yet the patterns exist, hundreds of them, meticulously created and maintained. The Inca records exist, fragmented and obscured by conquest and cultural suppression. Something was lost in the upheaval of conquest, something the Inca chose deliberately not to explain to their conquerors. The knowledge was buried, whether accidentally or by design. The Dogon Star Map. In Mali, West Africa, the Dogon people preserved an astronomical map of extraordinary and inexplicable accuracy that has puzzled modern astronomers and anthropologists for decades. They knew with remarkable precision the orbital characteristics of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked human eye, invisible even with ordinary telescopes. A star whose actual existence wasn't confirmed by Western science and its instruments until 1862, over a century ago. They knew the orbital patterns and existence of the moons of Jupiter that shouldn't have been visible without telescopes. They possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge that logically shouldn't have been possible without advanced telescopes and observation instruments. They claimed this extraordinary knowledge came from visitors who descended from the sky in vessels, bringing understanding of celestial mechanics and cosmic structure. Early anthropologists and researchers dismissed the Dogon's claims as having been acquired through modern 20th century contact with Europeans, perhaps from missionaries or traders who shared Western astronomical knowledge. But the evidence suggests the knowledge is far older than any modern contact could explain. The Dogon claim the sky visitors possessed vessels of flight, craft capable of interstellar or interplanetary travel, capable of bridging the vast distances between worlds. The visitors, called the Nomo in Dogon tradition, descended from above and ascended again to return to the stars. The accounts describe not abstract concepts or mystical ideas, but concrete machinery, propulsion systems, and navigational trajectories. Modern Dogon elders maintain that their direct ancestors by LT craft themselves using principles and knowledge taught by the Nomo, vessels that could achieve flight through understanding of forces unknown to modern physics. But all such craft were destroyed, they insist, either in ancient conflicts or deliberately to prevent misuse. The Dogon were isolated from the rest of the world by geography, separated by vast distances from other established civilizations. Their knowledge of advanced astronomy shouldn't have been possible without advanced observation tools and centuries of accumulated astronomical data, yet they possessed it, documented carefully in their oral traditions and sacred symbols. Did they build observational devices themselves? Flying apparatus capable of achieving the angles and altitudes necessary to map the heavens accurately? All evidence was supposedly destroyed deliberately to preserve the sacred knowledge from outsiders and prevent exploitation. The Dogon represent a profound anomaly in human knowledge. Astronomical knowledge preserved despite complete isolation. A memory of visitors from above, a fragmented but consistent account of flight, and a deliberate erasure of the mechanisms that made such flight possible. The Nazca Platform Complex. Recent satellite imagery and geological surveys conducted over the past 2 decades have revealed something that was previously overlooked at Nazca. Beneath the famous geoglyphs, beneath the vast bird and animal designs carved into the plateau, embedded deep within the plateau itself, are anomalous stone formations. Geometric platforms, rectangles and squares, precisely aligned with astronomical events and cardinal directions. Some researchers examining these structures with fresh perspective suggest they may have functioned as launch sites or operational bases. The Inca and the Nazca cultures, separated by centuries, both left evidence of aerial knowledge and capabilities. Both created massive geometric patterns visible only from above, from altitudes that would require flight. Both disappeared or declined before their technologies could be fully documented in writing. The platforms show signs of deliberate construction, using techniques that suggest understanding of load-bearing stress and weight distribution far beyond what their contemporary architecture typically required. Were they landing sites for returning vessels? Launch pads for ascending craft? Operational bases? The conventional archaeological explanation is that they served purely astronomical or ceremonial purposes, aligned to mark important celestial events. But the precision of their engineering suggests something more, something functional, something designed for use. If the Inca and Nazca peoples possessed flight technology, working craft capable of ascending and descending, what happened to it? Why did no subsequent South American civilization pursue similar achievements? The Spanish conquest interrupted everything abruptly. Records were burned, populations were decimated by disease and violence. Technologies were lost in the chaos, but something about the Nazca platforms remains untouched. Something engineered with purpose. Something that doesn't quite fit the historical narrative of pre-Columbian South American civilization. The knowledge was erased, not accidentally through time, but by design. The Spanish conquerors didn't understand it and couldn't reverse engineer it. The conquered peoples couldn't preserve it in the chaos of invasion. And now we're left with geometric anomalies and unanswered questions about what the Nazca people truly knew about the sky. The Mesopotamian bronze vessels. In the extensive excavations of Ur conducted over many decades, archaeologists uncovered something that fundamentally should not exist according to conventional historical understanding. Bronze vessels exhibiting aerodynamic properties that suggest methodical wind tunnel testing and iterative design improvement. The vessels are remarkably small, barely palm-sized, delicate and sophisticated works of metalworking craftsmanship, but their precise shape mimics exactly the contours of modern aircraft fuselages and fuselage designs. They are dated to approximately 2000 BCE, the height of Mesopotamian civilization, a period before formal aerodynamic theory, before powered flight, before even the basic principles were understood. Conventional archaeological explana tie-in places them as religious containers or decorative objects, perhaps offerings to gods or ceremonial vessels used in rituals. But their internal structure reveals precisely carved chambers and channels that serve absolutely no ceremonial or religious function whatsoever. Recent analysis conducted by materials scientists and aeronautical engineers with expertise in fluid dynamics suggests they were constructed deliberately according to established principles of fluid dynamics, air pressure differential, and aerodynamic lift. How would a bronze craftsman in ancient Mesopotamia understand such principles without formal scientific training or education? How would they test such aerodynamic designs without some form of working model or full-scale prototype aircraft? The vessels are currently housed in museums worldwide, studied occasionally by academic specialists, and then shelved away in storage areas, often unlabeled and uncatalogued. Few serious questions are asked about their aeronautical purpose. Few connections are made to other aeronautical anomalies around the world. Yet, if the Mesopotamians possessed this advanced aerodynamic knowledge, what else might they have created and built? What other technologies might be hidden in plain sight in museum collections, their true purpose misidentified by generations of archaeologists, their aeronautical significance completely overlooked? Conclusion: these 10 machines, scattered across continents and centuries of human history, do not represent random curiosities or archaeological oddities without meaning. They reveal a consistent pattern, a chilling model of erasure and suppression that repeats across cultures and time periods. Throughout documented history, advanced cultures discovered principles of flight, built working or semi-working aircraft, and then the knowledge mysteriously disappeared from the historical record. The Inca and Nazca left geometric markers visible only from the air, patterns that required flight to create and observe. The Sanskrit texts describe vimanas with precise operational specificity. The Greeks calculated steam propulsion centuries before it would be rediscovered. The Egyptians carved aerodynamic forms with surprising sophistication. The Persians and Islamic scholars understood magnetism and levitation. Leonardo da Vinci drew helicopters and ornithopters with mechanical accuracy. The Dogon preserved astronomical knowledge they shouldn't possess without telescopes. The Mesopotamians crafted bronze vessels with aerodynamic properties. Each case points to the same inevitable conclusion. Knowledge was achieved through study and testing, then lost. Sometimes through conquest and destruction. Sometimes through deliberate suppression and erasure. Sometimes through simple loss of understanding as generations died without passing knowledge forward. The pattern extends far beyond aviation technology. The Romans lost sophisticated concrete technology. The Antikythera mechanism was only one artifact of a vast computational technology that vanished. The Library of Alexandria burned. The libraries at Baghdad burned. Centers of knowledge across the world burned and scattered. Each fire erased not just books and documents, but the critical context necessary to understand them. What knowledge was lost? How much advanced technology did our ancestors actually achieve? How much knowledge have civilizations built, then buried, then had to rediscover from scratch? And who benefited from that endless cycle of loss and rediscovery? These 10 machines represent what might have been if knowledge had been preserved, a world where ancient peoples flew, a history where technology developed unevenly, where some cultures achieved breakthroughs centuries ahead of the linear timeline we are taught, a past where the suppression of knowledge was sometimes intentional, sometimes accidental, but always consequential. The tragedy is not that these technologies failed in their testing. The tragedy is that they worked, and that was precisely the problem that made them dangerous.